So my guest today is Josh Bachynski. Did I say it right?
Yeah,
Bachynski?
that's good. Yeah.
Okay. And Josh is the author of a forthcoming book called The Zombies, which I've had the pleasure of reading. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself and, go ahead and plug your website so that people know where to go to get the book.
Sure. So, as Leah mentioned, my name is Josh Bachynski. Um, I've been working in philosophy and internet marketing for, 20, 30 years. I wrote the book originally, I was telling Leah, as my master's thesis 10 years ago, and it kind of ballooned and blossomed from there. I have a TEDx talk on the future of Google search and ethics. I made a documentary about Google as well, and how they're, in my opinion, harming small businesses. You can find that on iTunes. It's called Don't Be Evil, Google's Secret War. And also the aforementioned website that Leah mentioned is thezombiesbook.com, where I'm releasing the book we're going to be discussing today. I'll be releasing for free there on PDF format. And go ahead, go there, check it out. It is called The Zombies. The subtitle is On Morality. That's just it. It's my take on ethics and morality, and in the book I claim to prove what morality actually is, a universal morality that we can all use, that applies to everybody. And I also give my comments on the current academic scene of moral philosophy, where they might have gone a little wrong. And I try and sum up all those arguments and put us on a new course.
Okay, very good. And now you said the book will be available like today, soon.
Very soon,
Okay.
yeah, very soon. My designer has it right now, and as soon as he can put it out.
Okay, great. Now, so in the book, okay, so the general thrust of your argument is that we are all suffering from a moral virus, so to speak, and that this virus basically ruins every society that we try. So what is the virus?
The virus is, there's a number of mind viruses, I think, that infect our minds, sadly, but the one that is the one we have to worry about the most, and the one that is the biggest problem overall, and both in general and in this context, is what I call the objective prescriptive virus. And it's the mind virus that makes us believe that our norms have to be objective in the sense that they're separate from us, and prescriptive in the sense that they're prescribing for us what it is we think we need to do, and what it is we think we can tell other people to do, probably more aptly.
Yeah.
And I call that a mind virus because it's transmitted like a virus. It's like a Trojan horse virus. It's embedded in the implicit semantic, I think, of a lot of words like should or ought, or when we're saying something is supposed to be, or they must do this. You were supposed to call me last night. You're not supposed to call people names. Empathy is supposed to be the most moral characteristic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's bipartisan. It affects both the right wing, in my opinion, and the left wing. And it's I think the main stumbling block we have moving forward in proving what universal morality is, because it's completely wrong. It doesn't. It tricks us into thinking we're making sense when we're actually speaking in nonsense, and it makes us think certain moral claims are self-evident, the ones that are sadly most cherished to us, that are in no way self-evident, in no way even evident, in no way sensical. And that I think that explains, and not that I need to explain this to prove what morality is, but I just, as a throwaway in the book, I think this explains a little bit why, anthropologically speaking, why so many smart people out of history have not noticed that this whole concept of morality they've been using is broken. Of course, many have noticed this. The postmodernists noticed this. The Greek skeptics noticed this. But then they thought, they simultaneously noticed this notion of morality, of universal morality, is broken. But then they even go further to exclaim, then I guess there's no morality and we can do what we want, kind of a deal, which I don't believe that follows either. And so I wouldn't put myself in any of those camps.
So this is, well, would you describe this as a middle way between both of those extremes?
Yeah, I could. I try to avoid metaphors like that. I would say it's the correct way.
Okay.
I would say
All right. and
It's
we'll get
a
to
valid
that.
and sound way.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to the logic of behind it. But so let's see. So you argue that all objectivist moral theories, whether deontological ethics or virtue ethics, et cetera, suffer from what you call the application fallacy. What is the application fallacy?
So the application fallacy for me is a fallacy that I discover and I explain in my book. Basically, it's the basic fallacy. If when you take a look at a moral sentence, so like lying is wrong, for example. Let's call that a moral sentence for the sake of argument.
Yep.
Depending on whatever system you use to try and justify that lying is wrong, I believe a lot of them would want to say that. The problem is that's not the entire sentence.
Yeah.
The entire sentence is lying is wrong for a certain group of people, because we can always ask for whom. For whom is it wrong for? And the complete sentence has to specify to whom that rule or that descriptive fact supposedly applies. And the problem there of the application fallacy is that they simply just assert that X is Y for Z, or X is Y for Z, sorry, I'm Canadian, X is Y for Z, without any kind of proof and assuming that sentence is self-evident when it's simply not. So the application fallacy is assuming that the for Z part of the sentence is self-evident when it simply is not self-evident. It doesn't have the grammatical form of self-evidence. The only self-evident sentences we know are sentences describing sentences. Description describing description. The grammatical form of the sentence shows what sentences are self-evident or not, merely because they refer to themselves, actually. And that sentence is not referring to itself. It's referring to another group of real people, supposedly, real people in the supposedly real world, to which this descriptive fact is purported to apply. And that's the insidious part about the objective prescriptive virus.
Yeah.
Because otherwise intelligent people say, yeah, lying is wrong for everyone, or they say, whatever, stealing is wrong for everyone, or whatever they say, whatever moral claims they make. And they don't stop to think, why does that sentence get to be true?
Yeah.
Why does that sentence get to be considered true? And it's implicitly self-evident. They don't question the self-evidence because they think, well, once I've justified my moral system, by de facto standard of doing that, all of my moral impositions I want to make are also therefore justified. But that doesn't follow either, right? So the sentence is simply not self-evident, and people think it's self-evident. That's the application fallacy. It's a form of begging the question, which, as far as I understand it, every single fallacy is a form of begging the question. So I named another specific form of begging the question.
Okay. Well, you also mentioned that subjectivist moral theories like postmodernism and others fail as well. But why do those fail? Since they aren't making the theoretically they're not making the application fallacy. Although in practice they probably are guilty of something similar. Because I mean, if somebody tells you that there is no truth, well, you shouldn't believe them either. But go on. Tell me why basically this subjective positions don't work as well.
Well, the subjective positions don't work as well for the exact reason you mentioned, is that their method is still prescription.
Yeah.
They presume the only method of morality is prescription, and then they say prescriptions fail, therefore there is no morality. That doesn't follow either. Just that argument doesn't follow, period. It's not self-evident either. That still begs the question, and the exact question it begs is, well, is that the only method of morality? I go in the book to show, and I have little graphs I could show you. I go in the book to show that prescription is not the only moral method. It's the preferred moral method. It's the moral method of the objective prescriptive virus.
Yeah.
But it's not the only moral method. And so I believe postmodernism fails in that regard because they simultaneously reject objective prescriptive morality while wanting to retain objective prescriptive morality, as you mentioned, especially in practice. And if you push any of them, and I've tried this experiment. I took one of their watches one time, and he said, "Give me back your watch." And I said, "No." He said, "You have to give me back your watch." I'm like, "No, I don't. You just said there's no morality, so I don't have to do anything like that." As soon as you push them, try to push them a little bit, and they become rather uppity, actually, very quickly. And they like to apply their morality as fast as possible. In fact, I argue in the book that postmodernism is not the destruction of morality. It's the complete unfettered morality on steroids. And it's the morality of the mob. It's the morality of Twitter. It's the morality of Facebook. It's the morality of the alt-right. It's the morality of the alt-left. It's the morality of all these really extreme emotional peoples hurling their moral epitaphs at each other and completely being oblivious to the fact that they've denied morality and simultaneously are using even a more vicious form of morality. And now this was, of course, on purpose from Nietzsche and Heidegger trying to destroy liberal democracy. And and the problem there, of course, is that they removed the notion of truth and improving oneself. And so now morality has nothing to guide it and nothing to restrain it as the way that anything needs to be guided and restrained, or it gets too extreme.
Yeah, but if there is no truth, we shouldn't take Nietzsche or Heidegger as an authority either.
Correct. That's the reductio ad absurdum, which when you discuss that with people who claim to be postmodernists, they try to rhetorically refute you by rolling their eyes and being like, oh, not that tired old argument. And I'm like, yeah, that tired old argument, it still applies, right?
That's funny.
Yeah. So in the book, I also go on to argue and give a few more pieces of ammunition for anyone who wants to argue against that, which is it doesn't matter what truth candidate they're trying to put forward, what kind of alternative fact they want you to believe in, what kind of post-truth variant they're trying to argue for. If internal to their system they cannot show how it is consistent, or to say the same thing another way, if they can't show how their truth variant is accurate, then it's useless. It's at best useless and at worst just a lie based on what it is they said they thought they were doing. So I talk quite a bit about that in the book as well.
So instead of either objectivism or subjectivism, you have argued for something called intersubjective predictive morality. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, and I thought that more eloquently you summed it up as you defined it as the ethics of the dinner table. What does that mean exactly?
Subjective predictive morality is, or intersubjective predictive morality, is quite simply, instead of being purportedly objective, self-evident statements that are floating in Plato's ether, the sentences comprised in the moral system are merely small little facts, like Jim likes pecan pie, or if let's eat here, this is the best idea. You know, when it's a deli, but Sally has a gluten allergy, so clearly the evidence shows this is not the best idea because Sally will get very sick for eating here. So that's the way it's intersubjective, and that it has to pass all the gates of all the subjects that the little fact purportedly applies to. And it's predictive in that it's not prescribing what is moral. It's simply describing or predicting what will be moral, what will be good, what will not be hurtful, what will be instead idyllic, optimal, beneficial for everybody, and thus what would be actually worth praising.
Yeah. Or
what's going to hurt some people and what would be actually worth blaming. If the person who suggested we should eat here, this is good enough, who's the evidence clearly shows is going to be hurting Sally because she has a gluten intolerance, that makes them actually worthy of some minuscule amount of blame for being too lazy or being too negligent or something along those lines, because no, your sentence is factually false.
Yeah.
And that's the bulwark as to what is moral or immoral. Is the fact true or not based upon the evidence. And so I also call this the ethics of the dinner table, because this is an ethics. I didn't invent this. This is an ethics. This is the ethic of the guest that has existed in ancient Greece and in Arabia for millennia. This is the ethic of doing good by somebody, doing right by someone.
Yeah.
That everybody knows and everybody happily practices when none of the other bullcrap moral views gets in the way, right? When you're having a Super Bowl party, and if you're being a good host, if you're being, in my definition, a moral person, you at the very least have accommodations for your Jewish friends, so some of the meatballs don't have pork in them or whatever it is, or your Muslim friends or whatever it is, or your vegan friends who are coming over, or whatever it is, whatever their requirements are, you quite happily and quite easily accommodate their requirements. It's the simple, practical ethic, caring ethic that people have been practicing at the dinner table, families have been practicing for millennia, and how you actually treat a guest if you want things to go well, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be worth praise, and you don't want to be worth blame, and you notice, and that's what you do. if you want things to go well. And you notice what it means if you don't want things to go well, if you're deciding to be negligent, one stage level bad in that scenario would be you forgot to give the gluten-free person an option so they could snack along with everybody else watching the Super Bowl. That's one level of negligence. Another level of even worse negligence there is you forget to tell them that these aren't gluten-free. And you say, oh, yeah, go ahead and eat. And Sally goes up there and starts stuffing gluten in her mouth, and then she gets bloated and she has to go to the hospital later. That's a whole another level of negligence, right? Of maybe even callous, if you maybe even knew that was going to happen and you secretly wanted it to happen, right? So that's what I mean by the ethic of the dinner table. It's this caring, practical ethic that is not pompous. It's not proclaiming from on high. It's humble in the sense that it is just looking at the simple facts and saying, look, these are what these people need. The Muslim says they need this. The Jew says they need this. The gluten person says they need this. The vegan person says they need this. Who the F are we to say otherwise? That's what they told us. Fine. So here you go.
Yeah.
And based on the evidence, this is what we provide to remain moral. Everything being idyllic, everything being good. This is also very closely tied and related to at least my interpretation of Plato's good. More Middle Plato dialogues like the Philebus, the Protagoras, Bloom's translation of the Republic, where very clearly the goal there was to get unmixed pleasures, and the practical effect of that would be happiness. And it's the practical effect that you're looking for, not because the forms told you so, or not because there's any, not getting into the laws of the Timaeus, where suddenly this is also divine or right. Yeah. That's where I would disagree with Plato, or I don't even know if that's my Plato doesn't say those things. I would interpret Plato differently. However, as 2,400 years of history has proven, getting any sufficient group of people to agree on what any philosopher has said, not much less the Plato, is practically impossible. So instead of writing a book I could have written a book, this is the proper way to interpret Plato, in my opinion. Instead of writing that book, I just wrote the book of This is Morality. And I fully admit, I was fully inspired by this a lot from Plato, Rousseau, Aristotle, some of these authors, amongst others, and some analytic authors as well. This is how I think this is all properly put together. Instead of writing that book, I just wrote the book of, okay, here it is. I wanted to be both theoretical sound, and that any philosophers reading it will get a valid and sound argument for why this is morality and why you should follow it. But also a practical morality, giving more examples about the ethic of the dinner table, and basically just the basic humble roots as to where this comes from. Every family has practiced it that's done well by their guest. And that's all I'm asking people to do, and just extend their thinking on that a little bit more to understand what is truly the good, what is truly optimal, what is truly idyllic.
Well, that segues nicely into what I was about to say next, which is that, so yeah, even after reading your book, I have to say that I'm still sort of attracted to like natural law, ethical and legal theories. But I can see your point that natural law, like you just said, in the Timaeus or whatever, if you're the form of the good, it's not necessarily self-evident, practically speaking. So basically, like, if God makes the law or nature makes the law, then that, the law becomes as mysterious as God or nature is. So basically, even if we accept, metaphysically speaking, that there might be a natural law, we need something more self-evident to live by, which is basically where your argument comes in. Correct? Like, could I still hold that metaphysical belief while not applying it practically?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is I also argue in the book that philosophy has to remember some of its basic principles that I think is forgotten. I think philosophy in general, and philosophy in particular and people in general, have forgotten that philosophy has always just been nothing more than conceptual analysis. And every concept needs to be analyzed before it can be accepted and should be accepted into the lexicon, including those concepts you just mentioned, like natural law. What the heck is that?
Yeah.
Or all these other these tenets that we're allowing into the conversation before they've even been analyzed, and they should have standing in said conversation. Yeah. So for me, I'm not asking anyone to accept my argument because I think it's self-evident, or because it's, although I do believe portions of it are self-evident, because the good is the good. And that's the only self-evident sentence that actually has semantic content, because the good also feels good. That's how we know it's good. If you call something good that doesn't feel good, then you're using the word wrong. That's not me saying it. That's self-evident, right? And that's the only self-evident component and base of the whole theory. But I'm not trying to get people to accept it because of that reason, or because I've made an abstract, argument in the forums, and here it is, accept it. And now let's talk about it, and let's have it compete with the other variations. I don't think there's any other variations to compete with.
Yeah.
They haven't passed the sniff test. They haven't passed the conceptual analysis test. Every sentence we have to look at, we have to ask, why does that get to be true?
Yeah. And
we have to analyze the form. Are they purporting this as self-evident? Or are they purporting this as evident? If it's evident, then just go check evidence. Just go check reality, physical reality. If they're purporting it to be self-evident, well, it better be referring to itself, because that's the only kind of self-evidence, apparently, that we know about, is representations representing representation, or descriptions describing descriptions. That's the only form of self-evidence, apparently, that we know of. You could postulate any others, but they have to follow that form, otherwise they're not self-evident. Because that's what self-evidence actually is. It's just describing description. That's it. So I would say my answer to your question that you asked is, I don't even know what natural law is, and I wouldn't even allow that whole concept into the conversation. That also runs afoul.
I mean, theoretically, you're supposed to be able to look at human nature, right, and from that derive this sort of law of, that all human beings are X or whatever.
Right. And yeah, of course, and that's the other problem, is that, when I ask, did they actually look at human nature, how many millennia ago, and have they updated it since? If your method is purportedly empirical, then it must remain consistently empirical. And now, apparently, the evidence suggests we have all kinds of types of humans who wish to be this gender, that gender, non-gendered, homosexual, straight, bisexual, polyamorous, monoamorous, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if your natural law is going to remain consistent and empirical, as they would like to maintain, because they think that justifies their what just comes down to be a rank moral imposition in the end, anyway, of how they think women should be, and how they think men should be, and how they think blah, 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 blah should be. If it's to remain consistent and empirical, now you must include all these other variations. But they never do that, of course.
Well, I don't know. I don't even want to go there. I'll get all kinds of hate mail on YouTube. I'm not sure.
I'm quite sure.
Well, so a lot of my viewers are Stoic, and I still find virtue ethics to be actually kind of a compelling moral theory. But what in your view is wrong with virtue ethics? Why should it be rejected, or parts of it?
Well, let me ask you, what do you find compelling about Stoicism first?
Well, there's a lot that's compelling about Stoicism, at least as a system to live by. Most people, when they talk about Stoicism, they're talking about the ethics, and they're not talking about the logic or the metaphysics. I actually find the metaphysics just as compelling as the ethics. But we don't need to talk about that because it's kind of irrelevant. But, okay, so you can boil it down to Epictetus, right? Some things are within my control and others are not. So that's actually a really good way of looking at life. What can I actually do something about? I can't necessarily do something about other people's behavior, but I can control my own behavior. And I think that I like it, and a lot of other people like it because it's rather empowering. In the type of world that you're talking about, where we have this moral virus, or where you can't control what other people are going to do to you and so forth, or things that happen to you that are potentially negative. It's you don't necessarily have to view them as negatively as long as you are a virtuous person.
Yeah. I mean, there's a short answer and a long answer. Which would you prefer? Would you like the short answer or the long answer?
Sure, the short answer is good.
Spoken like a Stoic, spoken like a practical person. Sure, the short answer is sadly that view is still infected by the objective prescriptive virus. There's no reason any of those sentences you said are self-evident, or they should self-evidently be a moral theory. And I would argue the only reason why they're practical in any way, shape, or form is to the degree they follow subjective predictive morality, to the degree that being virtuous is good. So it's not that you're a Stoic, actually you're a Platonist. If you're seeking, because you're seeking the good. Everyone seeks the good. Everyone's a Platonist without realizing it. The only reason why any of those things you said are to be followed or are any good is because, and to the degree they participate in the optimal, idyllic concept, the good. Now, that doesn't mean it's completely theoretical and you need to think negatively about anybody else.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that it doesn't have practical application. In fact, it is the most practical application. As I try to show and prove in the book, there is no difference between prudence and morality. They are the exact same thing. They only diverge when morality definitionally can no longer be applied to what we're doing because sadly we had to hurt a couple people. But that is technically immoral if the definition of morality is to remain consistent. Morality, to be moral, can't hurt anybody. It has to be always good. It has to be always moral. It has to be always praiseworthy, if those words are to make any sense. And I'm not saying those words have to make sense. I'm just saying if those words are to make sense, and we're going to use those consistently, that's what the word moral means. And the second that we consciously hurt somebody, or we cannot be almost certain that our activity will hurt somebody, will or not hurt somebody, that's when we start, we might still be acting prudently because it's the best bad option out of all bad options, but it's still a bad option. So it doesn't get to be called moral, but it still might be the option that we have to take because, again, it's the best bad option out of all evidently bad options.
Well, what if
I would argue,
go on. I'm sorry, go on.
I would argue that actually you do follow subjective predictive morality. Everybody does.
Yes.
It's just that the objective prescriptive virus gets in the way and makes you think certain sentences are self-evident. Ones that are more cherished to you, I would humbly suggest. Ones that are more practical, that you find more useful, that appeal to you more. But I would humbly suggest if you analyze those sentences, you'd realize they're not self-evident, and what you've been looking for all along is the good. And I argue in my book, I have the most clear conception of it and the most practical way of attaining.
So, what if I were to say, along the same lines as what you said before, if I can claim that I'm a third gender, a fourth gender, whatever gender, I can claim that. Isn't it that the same as saying virtue is good for me? Isn't it okay within, intersubjective predictive morality to say, well, virtue is good for me? So long as I don't make it necessarily true for everyone, I can say, well, I feel that, it's good for me to be virtuous or whatever, so long as I define what virtue is. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, and that's, thank you for pointing that out, because that's, I think, a very handsome mechanism in the theory that I've discovered and written down, is that it once you're using common facts and an intersubjective gate for everyone's intrinsic needs, you're right. They can define themselves to be anything. They could say their gender is green. They could say, and they do. Some people do. You could say virtue is good for you. You could say Allah is good for me. You could say the Hebrew way of looking at it is good for me. But you can't go and apply that to everybody else as if it's self-evident. You can only apply it to yourself. All of these various sundry views, and some of them harmful, possibly potentially harmful if they're pushed to extremes, are now all personalized and privatized and cannot be dictated to anyone else from on high, or nor can you justifiably hold them to supposedly self-evident dictates which are actually not self-evident. And you can't claim to be moral and good in doing so if it causes them any kind of shape or harm. So yeah, you can be whatever you want, obviously, and you can remain consistent with my system or the system that I wrote down, and still call yourself a Stoic and a virtue ethicist, and seek arete, all you like. And there is that component in there because I do like those portions of Aristotle as well. Seeking excellence, being virtuous, partaking in the good in that sense, and being good in that sense. If that's what we're talking about all the same thing. And so actually, practically speaking, I probably have no problem with how you're conducting everything, as long as it satisfies the rational procedure that I also set down in the book.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. Now, Do you think that intersubjective predictive morality, is there an easier way to refer to it? How would you like me to refer to it? Is that good, or to use your
SPM,
vocabulary?
subjective predictive morality.
Okay.
SPM.
Shouldn't it be ISP? Shouldn't it be ISPM?
Well, intersubjective was a buzzword I originally used in my master's thesis.
Okay.
Because I knew it would. At Dalhousie, when I was doing my master's thesis, they talked a lot about objective subjective, and I knew that I would rhetorically position myself well to get in my MA thesis passed if I made up an imaginary third category. So that's why I called it intersubjective predictive morality. But at the end of the day, the intersubjective is nothing but a bunch of subjects.
Well, I think it should be intersubjective because it differentiates it from something subjective, at least strictly.
That's true. Yeah, no, you're right. And there's that branding there as well. But at the end of the day, to shorten it, you can call it SPM, subjective predictive morality. Just remember that that's all the subjects involved. It's a bunch of subjects. It's not just you. It's not just one person. Because that's usually, I find, when people start talking about postmodernism and those kind of subjective, prescriptive kind of theories, they're thinking about it from their own perspective. Just remember, subjective predictive morality is kind of outside looking into a whole bunch of subjects. It's like looking at your garden and thinking, okay, the carrot's like this much sunlight and this much water, but the cauliflower doesn't like that. What's good for each of these subjects, plural? That's kind of how it also, that practically, again, how it plays out. But you can call it SPM.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Is SPM compatible with the Stoic concept of justice, defined as giving each person his due, fair dealing as a personality trait? Fair dealing with each person. Isn't that quite similar to what you're talking about?
It really depends on what you mean by fair. But I think the answer would have to be no.
Okay.
Because that's where, now forgive me, I'm going to attack a little bit.
Yeah.
That's where it sounds to me like you're starting to turn around and starting to use your morality to potentially even hurt other people.
How so?
Well, again, I don't know what you mean by the word fair. Or giving
that's just how it's. That's just often how it's rendered from the Greek. But there's a yeah, I don't. That's not necessarily my term. It's just it's one translation. But so basically, like giving each person their due. Let's put it that way. Like giving them. I mean, you could. I guess it totally depends. I see what you're saying on how it's defined. But all right, so. I don't know. I guess it depends on how you render, Greek, like the Greek from justice from the Greek. So I don't know. But so
the other, I mean, that sounds to me like Polemarchus's conception of justice from the Republic, which is good to friend and harm to enemies. Clearly, for me being a mid-Platonist, and clearly from what I've said, that would not fly. So to put it more in my language. No. One, who are you to give anyone what they are supposedly self-evidently due? Two, that's a virus in your head telling you that A, that's self-evidently what they're complicit in being, and B, that you're the one who's supposed to impose that.
But even in terms of behavior, isn't that like what you're arguing for, though? That you
No. This is where we would probably diverge the most so far. In that, the second you go to intentionally hurt somebody, you are being immoral. You are being unethical. By the semantic of those words, it doesn't matter what you think they're due.
Well, aren't you thinking of justice in the modern sense? Whereas I'm talking about a personality trait where you wouldn't willingly harm someone, and I guess it doesn't totally rule it out. I mean, maybe it doesn't rule out but then self-defense is fine under your system as well. So I mean, yeah, I think I see it as more of a personality trait of how you're treating others than something to be imposed from the outside. It's probably the modern concept of justice differs from the ancient one, at least in the Stoic system, a little bit. So maybe that's.
Of course, yeah, and I mean, Plato's whole sense of justice, of course, is ancient, is completely different. The argument can be made that in the Republic, he's just talking about not a hypothetical city that he's actually proposing that people make. He actually says it directly against that. No, I'm not saying you should go make this city. It's never going to work for these three-wave argument. In book 5 was that, I believe it was. But this is just an argument for the soul and how to make the just soul, the harmonized soul with reason, will, and desires harmonized. Yeah, so I appreciate that. But the problem is when we get divorced from the actual factual sentences. Again, we always have to go back to the sentences and not use a metaphor or not use a rule of thumb where facts will suffice and should be the only thing that are sufficing, because rules of thumb and metaphors betray and beguile. And therein is an opportunity for what I also call the snake, the serpent in the biblical sense. Therein comes the opportunity for pride. Therein comes in the opportunity for the objective prescriptive virus, making you think you get to dictate A, what morality is, or B, hold others to said dictates. So no, I would have to disagree completely,
Okay.
and this I would throw up all my warning flags and say, "Warning, danger, Will Robinson! This is I see the serpent lurking here, and this might be a nice poetic way of saying it, but this is not what you should be following." At the end of the day, anytime subjective predictive morality, when it comes to the conduct with others, is always I give a chart with three pillars, the 3-pillar chart. And if you cannot be almost certain, the farthest you can go in the 3-pillar chart is annoyance, right? If you're not sure whether or not you annoy them, fine, because annoyance is something that they're going to forget. That's not going to be lastingly harmful. It's not going to be lastingly hurting them. And if it is, well, then you've tripped over into, that is the very demarcation of tripping over into immorality and tripping over into injustice. Now, I have 3 black belts, so I also teach martial arts. So I teach my students based on all these theories. So if some guy comes at you and you think you have to break his jaw to put him down or punch him really hard in the face, well then do so. And yeah, that's not, I'm going to be very sure that I'm going to be hurting this person. So immorality is out the window. It's the best bad option out of many other bad options, but it's still the option that would be prudent and rational to take and optimal and part of the good to take. It's just an insufficient good that's not good enough to call moral, because if that definition is going to remain consistent, no one can be offended or hurt or upset or insulted.
Yeah.
And still call it moral. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
So I don't know what they're due. I don't even know what that concept means. It sounds to me like the objective prescriptive virus. But I do know that the rational procedure teaches me what is rational on a factual basis, and also ethical and moral too, and following it is optimal. At the end of the day, it's what is optimal and idyllic, which is what we're going for, which is a real practical thing that we try and achieve every single decisions we make on every single day. My argument is just that everyone's doing it very poorly. They're misconfigured. They are not doing it well enough. It's not optimal enough. And I'm trying to clear away the viruses that are getting in the way of making these optimal decisions so that we can make more optimal decisions as a person, as people, as families, as friends, as societies, and as countries. Because look what we've been doing to the world. This is clearly not optimal. This is not idyllic. And we're not going to have a world very much longer if we don't smarten up and start really realizing what is truly fully optimal, what is truly fully idyllic.
So, well, what is the correct procedure or the ideal process for making these types of moral decisions and for minimizing risk of harm to others?
So that's the rational procedure. And based off the evidence, I infer that it can be broken down to these 3 guidelines. It's waiting as long as evidently safe, to look at the max amount of evidence to get the maximally optimal result. And checking the maximum amount of evidence and also waiting for the maximum amount of insight about said evidence. So basically I could sum it up in saying patience. Every decision that doesn't seem like, someone's going to get really hurt right now or some really bad situation is going to happen evidently right now. If you've got time to wait. Be patient. Look for more evidence. Take more time to consider the evidence. Consider how your long-term feelings are going to be about this and what everyone's long-term feelings are going to be about this. Basically, that's it. And again, I didn't invent it. This is being patient in decision is something that older, wiser people have told younger people, I think, since, we've been talking, right? Since our species has been talking to each other. So, I didn't invent it. And that's what most no philosophy invents anything. Philosophy is just discovering and explaining in small steps, I think, what is already there. And people have just overlooked and forgotten, and that's the onus of every generation to do that. Because sadly, we can't trust the truth to Google. We can't trust the truth to Facebook. We can't trust the truth
Yeah.
to politicians. You can't trust the truth to corporations or rich people. Every human being has an onus on them.
Yeah.
Practically speaking, I'm not talking objectively. Practically speaking, it appears to me that every human has an onus on them to discover what the truth is for themselves. I noticed you had some kids there, and I don't have any kids myself, but I'm an uncle, and I watch my nephew becoming a thinking thing in front of my eyes and figuring out reality. And I realized when I was looking at him, realizing what reality is and what concepts are, and just these basic building block kind of concepts, that every human has to do this for themselves, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And when they're doing this, this is philosophy. And the society that hides philosophy, diminishes philosophy, tries to stop or stunt or retard this process because they want to sell them more cars, or because they want women to be this or men to be that, or for whatever misguided reasons they do so. We endanger everything. And I also talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah, well, so the next question I was going to ask about, you said the most you're allowed to do is annoy someone. And so when one person's interests conflict with another, we'll discuss what happens. So basically, like, one example that you gave that I remember pretty clearly is an example of a Western feminist going to a conservative Muslim country and dressing in a provocative way. And the turn of phrase that you used was that this feminist was subjected to some unfortunate solipsism in her undergraduate education. And that amused me enough that it stuck with me. But yeah, so what happened? So, okay, so this person, this person's interests conflict with the interest of other people that she's obviously annoying, or because in a different culture where it's not really acceptable for women to dress this way or whatever. So exactly how should that be resolved optimally, or how do these intersubjects, how did their interests get rectified there?
That's a great question. So and I used that example pretty on purpose because it was very morally difficult, and of course it's a very charged issue on both sides. Because if no moral theory is any good if it can't resolve scenarios like that, right? So there's a couple ways I could answer that question. Before I answer it, I just want to say that I'm a liberal, left-leaning liberal Democrat. Clearly, my emotions are on the side of empathy for what would appear to be the most aggrieved party in this regard, which you could argue is the feminist who and her friends who mistakenly thought the world was safe and that they could have their cleavage out all over the place and not get any trouble and really actually upset people, not just annoy them, but upset people who have strongly different views.
Yeah, okay.
At the same time, I would say, well, why do they have those views to begin with? Do not mistake my argument for siding with the right, quote unquote, in saying that I'm not slut shaming them in any way, shape, or form, and I am saying, well, maybe
Well, it's not safe practically, though. Right.
It's not. The problem here is not safe practically. Now, if the angry male Muslim policemen come up to them and hurt them or berate them or assault them in any way, they are to blame. That is blameworthy in the system, no matter what reason they think they have. It doesn't matter how short her skirt is. She's not asking for it, and that's not her fault, right? So I want to make that clear. That is my position ultimately. However, if this person wants to ask me, well, am I doing something wrong going here? Well, yes, you knew, or you should have known ahead of time. There's plenty of evidence apparent to you ahead of time that could have been within your view that going to these places and traveling, looking in this way, for whatever reason, because you want more appealing looks or you want to make a feminist statement, you cannot be almost certain you're not going so far as to actually emotionally upset these people and cause trouble. Whenever you're causing trouble, it's very difficult for it to be ethical, because you're causing trouble. Starting problems is usually always the wrong answer. Solving problems is always the correct answer when it comes down to the facts. I'm speaking quickly in ways that might make it sound like I'm inserting objective prescriptivism in here, but I'm not. I want to just remain that clear to everyone listening that I could break this down into a long argument like I did in the book for 30 pages, but we don't have that much time, right? So in the book, I'm very clear about how this all comes down to the facts of the matter, and how either they did or did not fail on the three pillars chart. Either side did or did not fail on the three pillars chart. If the another practical rule of thumb, and again I would break down to the base atoms of my argument, but that would take a long time. I won't do so now. Is whenever you enter an alien society, you basically give up your instrumental wants in favor of their intrinsic needs. So if the male Muslim policemen walk over and say, "Please cover up. We're not removing your ability to practice your sexuality and your views elsewhere, and we're not decrying you or assaulting you in any way for these disagreements. But we are informing you that around here, that's not how we behave. Your behavior is hurting and upsetting us. Please cover up." It would be just the same if the female students walked in and started poking people really hard. It's the exact same mechanism. They say, "Please stop doing that."
Wouldn't that be great if people addressed each other that way?
Yes. Well, I think if they follow my book, they will. I think all the anger will be dialed down from 11 down to a manageable amount of like 1 or 2, and they could start with please don't do that. That is something offending me, and so that's essentially what they're doing. Now, should it be this way to begin with? No. A woman should be able to walk around completely naked, and men shouldn't be so weak and vicious and disgusted by their libidinous thoughts that this causes an issue. I mean, the human body is the human body. For hundreds of thousands of years, we all walked around naked, and our species seemed to survive. So in Europe, plenty of places on beaches, it's not a big deal. People go around naked all the time because everyone's not so ramped up, right? That is how you would actually fix the problem. But it doesn't matter. I could have used the North American, and you might have read the footnote, I could have used the North American example of the Lady Godiva who wants to go around any North American town in Canada or the States completely naked. Most places she'd be arrested, and that's not allowed, again, because it's going to cause such a stir that it could potentially make car accidents, and people are going to, get upset and incensed. And so whether those arbitrary legal laws are just or are ultimately ethically demonstrable or justifiable or not is irrelevant. The ad hoc legal system that we place uncomfortably on top what is actually ethically immoral is just that. It's the ad hoc system that we made. Could it be better? Sure. Should we make it better? Yes. But it is what it is on a daily basis, and therefore you have to consider violating that when you're doing your three pillars or your rational procedure, is how that's going to play out and how it's going to offend people when you're going and doing that. I make the same argument as to a very garish pride display in a very conservative Muslim town. Should people be proud to be gay? I think people should be proud, period, of being good people. Gay notwithstanding. Should the world probably treat minorities better? Yeah, definitely. I think the world should treat everyone better. Minority or not. But does that mean you would be ethically justified in making a really garish pride display in the middle of a conservative town where clearly fights are going to break out and murders could possibly happen? No, that would be unethical because that's causing that's not causing good trouble, that's causing bad trouble, right? If you want to get your message out there are safer, more justified, more idyllic. And this is the point. There are more idyllic, more optimal ways of doing it. And if I question some of the people who wanted to make this very garish pride display, I would say, why do you really want to do this? Because you just want to thumb your nose at these people, don't you? It has nothing to do with yay, here I am homosexual. You really want to get a little bit of revenge, don't you? Really, truly. And same thing with the tiki torch carrying idiots who were down there in the States recently. This is not really about being white and the Jews, whatever kind of complete nonsense bullshit they believe. This is more about thumbing your nose at everybody else that you feel like you've been relegated to your mom's basement for too long, probably justifiably, and now you are en masse. You've got just enough little weak courage to come out here with your tiki torches. Again, that's not ethical to do. It's going to be causing trouble. It did cause trouble. People died. So
Sorry. Now this is taking a more somber turn. But before I was laughing about, have you ever seen Top Gear? You ever watch Top Gear, that British show about cars? Like, it was a real popular show.
No, I don't think I have. No.
It was really funny, the British one, not the American one. But they did tours of foreign countries and stuff. And when they came they went to the southern part of the United States, like Alabama, like some like rinky-dink town in Alabama, and they painted things on the side of their cars to purposely like upset people like that. And one of the things they wrote was country western rubbish. And some people like in a pickup truck came up, they're like, why do you want to do that? This is a hick town, obviously people like country here. So I was just reminded of that scene when you said someone's purposely going to a conservative town or a small town and making a scene like that. But yeah, too bad you haven't seen it. It's so funny. What a funny show that is.
And without the danger of sounding like a ho-hum kind of boring moral system, where my system seems to be in these cases to be like, everyone calm down, everyone relax, But quite frankly, yeah, what's wrong with that? Everybody calm down.
Yeah.
Everybody relax.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It was
calm
funny.
down. Both sides relax. Both sides think about solving problems and not starting them. Both sides think about being more reasonable, being more idyllic, seeking what is more optimal, what makes everybody happy, the maximum amount of happy. Why? Because that's the maximum amount of happy. Like, I don't have to justify the maximum amount of happy. The maximum amount of happy is the maximum amount of happy. And if you don't want to give that to other people, then there's just a little bit of evil in your heart that you need to get rid of.
Yeah. Although, well, if they hadn't done that, it would have taken the humor out of the situation too. But I guess, you don't want humor that's at someone's expense, I guess, to an extent. I don't know.
I would say yes, and I would say that that particular example, however funny, however much I would have snickered watching it too, that they cannot be almost certain that they're not going to upset people.
Yeah. Let
me tell you the actual story that where I discovered this. So I was standing in Starbucks in a line, and I suffer from an anxiety disorder. And so I had this place in Starbucks, which was a little seat that watched the ocean where I live. And it was one place that I thought I could sit and relax, my own little kind of mecca, I could kind of relax, So I saw the chair was open, and so I quickly went out of line. There was no one behind me at the time, or at least I thought. I went quickly out of line, I put my shirt down to save the seat, I stepped back quickly in line. Unbeknownst to me, this older gentleman, and I'm presuming his wife, were happily stepped in front and kind of blocked me from coming back to take my place in line. And there's only one, it's not like it was a huge line, there's only one person. And I just stood right in front of him and turned right around. And I heard him say behind me, well, it's like we didn't even stand here at all. And so I turned around to him and said, oh, sorry, I was already standing here. I just went to put my shirt on the chair. Is that okay? So basically in my book, that's called asking for verisimilitude, right? Because it's not always easy to know what's going to offend or hurt somebody or what their limits are. So there's no better remedy than asking. Like, are you okay with this? Is this good? And if they say yes, and nothing in their behavior or in their past history or physical science contradicts them, then it's okay to take them at your word, and you can be certain or almost certain that apparently, based on what they said, this is not going to go beyond annoyance for them. And so they were annoyed at my actions, but I don't think they were upset. I hope not, and I don't think they even talked about it the next day or the day after. They probably complained, well, that guy was a jerk in Starbucks, probably driving home, and that was probably it. So I think I still was on the level of being ethical there and still moral. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. We're shooting for that goal. We can't always know if we've gotten that goal, but as long as we recognize the goal and we're shooting for that goal, and we're getting that goal more often than not, then we can say everything's all good and keep going for what is maximally happy for everyone or maximally idyllic for everyone, including oneself. Because the point is that it was a high risk threshold for me, because if I didn't get that chair, so I thought at the time, if I don't get that chair, I don't get my 20 minutes rest, and then I don't get to go, then I'm going to have an anxiety attack if I go back to work and have to listen to them yelling at me all day without my 20 minutes of breather, right? Whether that was true or not, that's how the evidence appeared to me at the time as well. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, wouldn't you say that? So you're saying that when it comes to discussing difficult subjects where people disagree, at least just in terms of argument or whatever, it's fine so long, because you're risking upsetting someone if you're talking about an upsetting subject. But, so you're saying it should be done with as much as much tact as possible, correct? Like, how does that apply to upsetting something that, I mean, because you can't, if you completely don't touch on certain subjects, then you're not necessarily being truthful. You're not really going after the truth, right? So how you should, if you're going to have a difficult conversation, it's more a matter of tact than it is about abstaining from saying anything that could potentially upset someone, correct?
Yeah, and I talk a lot about this in the book, and I leave a lot of what I hope are really practical, really good suggestions as to how to handle this. Basically, for people who are going to follow my system, for the subjective predictive moralists, our general method is not going to be contradicting anyone. It's going to be asking them, how is this the best thing to do? How is this optimal? How is this the maximally idyllic thing to do? And in asking that simple question, that's going to guide them towards the correct answer without us having to beat them over the head with it or explain it to them. Because everyone seeks the maximal good is the most ironic thing. We just are all failing at getting it because we have poor theories of it and our virus-ridden theories of it as well. So that's all we have to do is, well, okay, I hear you, but how is this the best thing? How is this the maximally optimal thing?
Yeah.
And then without doing any of those things that would possibly provoke or spark debate or argument, we're grabbing them and going, no, here's the good.
Yeah.
Out of the Plato's cave metaphor, we're grabbing them, we're pulling them out of the cave and saying, here's the good, and we put them back in their seat and see if they can replicate it without having to debate them or get rid of those chains or those chains of moral indignation, without them rattling the chains at all, or without hurting their head against their board of moral habituation. To use Plato's metaphor.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking about my next question. So, all right. So, as a corollary to your argument, I would argue that, well, you would refer to the ad hoc legal structure, which is an interesting way of putting it. But I would argue that government itself is really sort of the largest purveyor of objective prescriptive morality. So doesn't your argument, when implemented, necessitate small government or direct democracy, anarchy? What do you think about the implications there? Because there's this problem of utility when it comes to government, right? Because all of their actions are necessarily utilitarian. When you're dealing with such vast numbers of people, there's no way for it to be intersubjective, because how can individual needs be considered when, it's inherently hierarchical and impersonal?
Yeah, I agree with part of what you're saying, but part of it I disagree with.
Yeah.
I agree. There has to be an ad hoc legal structure that's put on top. Rules of what are instruments to the good have to be determined, and laws need to be set up. And pretty much as they exist on the books, in most liberal democracies, I'd be mostly fine with a few rare exceptions, of course. But it's why the laws were created for and what the good of them is in the first place that the polis and the politeia and the justice system all needs to keep in mind, and that will orient and guide them. Instead of making rank utilitarianism decisions where the majority is served but the minority is hurt, if that is the goodest you can ever get, that's not good enough, right? And utilitarianism fails as a moral theory because it allows, for two reasons. One, it's equally as infected by the objective prescriptive virus as anything else. It says the right action is the one in which the majority is served and the minority is not. Well, that's not self-evident. That runs afoul of the application fallacy, just like all the other moral theories do that are not SPM.
Yeah.
And two, it's hurting somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What is the greater good matter if you're the one or your family is the one that gets screwed over, Right. There's no such thing as the greater good. Yeah.
There's just what's maximally optimal in situ, in this particular situation. And we're always seeking what's maximally optimal in situ, including the possible situation that nobody is hurt. Fancy that everyone gets their cake and everyone gets to eat it too. At least that's what we're going for. If we never go for it, if we never aim for it, then we're never going to get it. Now, I fully admit that there's plenty of situations in politics and law where that is simply impossible. As I
Yeah.
say in the book, someone's going to get the web design job, and 10 people are going to lose it. Someone's going to get to date, The Bachelor, and 20 girls are not, or whatever. I think that's all bad. Actually, I don't think anyone should be on that show, but that's beside the point. You know what I mean? There's plenty zero-sum competitions in society, and that's just the way it's going to be. And it's going to be even worse until we all maximally optimize and maximally orient ourselves to go for the maximally idyllic situation in every situation, and at least have that always as our bulwark, always as our goal to go for. But we do need rules of conduct, obviously, because people get drunk, people get emotional. The rational procedure can be conceptually arduous, especially if people are not educated to it since birth. I argue that, along with Rousseau, that actually, if people, against Plato, that actually if people were educated to this since birth, I think you'd see a lot more success and a lot more results. Right? If everyone's trying to seek the maximally optimal thing because it's the maximally optimal thing known as the maximally optimal thing, and everyone has been spending every second of every day since they were born being educated to do that and trying to do that, I think you'd see the vast majority of society doing it, and all the problems of society, virtually all the problems of society, go away. If we could do it in one single generation. If one single generation had my book and took it to heart, or something very similar, that's not to be my book, some similar philosophy, and realized what was maximally good about what's maximally good, and realized what's maximally idyllic about what's maximally idyllic, and how idyllic it is and how optimal it is, and everyone was spending every second of every day to be patient and process what that is in this scenario and go for it and get it, then we would be living in a paradise. We would have none of these problems, and all the problems would be resolved. The only thing left would be random genetic variants of psychopaths who would be noticed, educated, and/or contained way earlier before they're able to do anything to hurt anybody. Usually, in most cases, statistically speaking. So yeah, we're going to need an ad hoc law system to try and guide everyone as to signposts of pre-decided SPM, like no murdering people hurts and upsets quite a few. Illegal, our stealing does this too. Lying under oath, there has to be a mechanism so we can get facts to process jurisprudence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But those lawmakers always keeping in mind subjective predictive morality, and always keeping in mind the good, the optimal, the maximally idyllic, and why the laws were constructed to attain that in the first place. And then everything will be righted to the optimal direction. Everything will be more optimal.
That sounds, I don't know, it sounds slightly idealistic on your part, but it would be much better than what we currently have.
It is completely idealistic, and again, I would argue with Rousseau that don't tell me it's impossible until you try it.
So in the book, you've criticized, and you mentioned this early in the interview, you criticize both the political right and the left. Now, I like anything that falls outside of the sort of narrow left-right political spectrum, because I think it's a horrible paradigm for evaluating politics, for evaluating ideologies to begin with. I think we should evaluate them based at least partially on how hierarchical they are, rather than some arbitrary left versus right, that goes back to the French Revolution and doesn't make any sense. But so what do both sides get wrong, in your opinion?
Well, that's a great question that I talk about in the book quite a lot too. Both sides are hopelessly infected by the objective prescriptive virus, and so they presume their left-wingisms or their right-wingisms, their tired left-wingisms and their tired old right-wingisms are completely self-evident, and thus they are entirely irresolvable. There's no common ground. There's no possible resolution between when you think your contradicting statement is self-evident and they think their contradicting statement is self-evident. Those two views are never going to be compatible. You have to delete the objective prescriptive virus that makes them think this description command hybrid of kind of sentence is valid and self-evident, and make them realize it's not. But without running afoul of what postmodernism did, is then just saying, well, there's moral anarchy and the strong rule and do what you want. That doesn't follow either, right? We need the true option. We need the factual option, which is, listen, things can be optimal. There are things that are optimal and idyllic. It would be optimal and idyllic to make them. go, you
Yeah.
know. And I'll note whenever the left and right do work together, it's because they drop the self-evidence of these propositions for a single moment, dare I say, and then convene to the middle, which is what is optimal and idyllic, and it's usually helping people or not hurting them, which is usually what is optimal and idyllic, helping them or at least not hurting them. That's
Yeah.
another rule of the
Yes. Yeah.
book. If you want a common rule of thumb, do you want to know what you're doing is truly ethical, truly moral? Well, are you helping people or at least not hurting them and helping some people, yourself, the maximum amount of people you can help in this scenario, and at least not hurting them? Good, then go, then do it. Ironically, it's very similar to a lot of other ethical mantras that have been chanted all over history, like the Hippocratic Oath, for example, do no harm, make things better.
Yeah.
Yep, that's pretty much the same thing. I just systematized it and made it bigger and stronger, I hope. At least that's my goal.
Yeah.
Or the Wiccan Rede, for example, and in harm none, do as thine will. The only thing I would say is that the ancient European pagans got slightly wrong there, was that it's not do as thine wilt, it's seek the maximal good. If it harm none, seek the maximal good, right? The maximal good, you should have went a little further south into Greece, around the 4th, 5th century BCE. Seeking the maximal good is what is maximally good. Why should I do it? Because it's maximally good. There's no other answer. There's no other reason. These are all facts I'm stating based on self-evident, the only self-evident moral claims that have any semantic content, because the good is good insofar as that it feels good. So it's consistent. It's practical. It shows you what to do. It shows you why. It shows you where to go. It resolves debates. The moral system we end up on has to resolve debates.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed throughout history the moral systems we rely on have resolved debate in the sense that anyone who disagreed was either murdered, or the moral system was so emotionally rhetorical that their believers were so fervent about it that debate against them wasn't possible. That's how it resolved debate. Right? The moral system for human beings has to resolve debate, and this is the one and the only way to say it that is going to resolve debate in a way that keeps people factual and keeps people also moral.
Very good. So I was going to ask you what the sort of most important takeaway from your book, or that we've discussed today, was going to be. But I think you can say something else if you want, but you just sort of summed it up. So, but you feel free to say something else if you have something else to say.
I would add on simply that I started writing this book when Bush was president, and I made some very interesting observations about the pendulum swing that you mentioned of between the left and the right.
Yeah.
How you can't get rid of that pendulum swing, because at the end of the day, the left and the right are characterized simply by one's emotional biases. One has extreme empathy, the other does not. Right? That's basically it. And I think that's genetic. I don't think you're ever going to get rid of that in the human system.
I don't know if I agree with that characterization. It's just they have different ideas about how best to help people, or at least about how best not to hinder them or whatever,
Sure. Okay. I won't hang my flag on that just to save time.
Yeah.
But the other upshot that I would mention, based on what I also said about the optimal good or the optimal idyllic, is the optimal idyllic, and there's no other reason to do it because it's optimal idyllic. What other reason is there? There is no other reason. That's what everyone tries to do and just fails.
Yeah.
That, I guess, could be the upshot of the book. Also including that, what happens if we fail to do that?
Yeah.
What happens if we fail to take this philosophy to heart that we've been trying to do forever and just have failed to do it? Is that we are going to die. Our technology is now powerful enough that we can literally destroy the entire planet in numerous ways. Nuclear ways, in biological weapon ways, in just our consumerist waste ways. That is already happening all around us. So if we do not realize what is optimal and get oriented into what is truly, fully optimal and idyllic, what is ideal for everyone, there's going to be a very shrinking population on this planet. So I say in the book, I'd rather that 9 billion happy people do this as opposed to 900 living in a bomb shelter somewhere. But it will be done eventually. Subjective predictive morality is the end morality for human beings because it resolves the debates. It clears away those problems. It clears away the virus. It clears away the misinterpretations and the misunderstandings, and it resolves on a cohesive human group and makes that cohesive human group maximally evolutionarily advantaged. If we don't do that, sooner rather than later, it's going to be 9,000 people in a bomb shelter here and 9,000 people in a bomb shelter in China doing it. It'll be 18,000 people on the planet that we've ruined, as opposed to 9 billion people doing it happily on a planet that we're saving. So that would be my main takeaway.
Yeah, well, that worries me too. That's a negative note to end on.
Well, all you have to do is get my book or get a book like it. There are no others like it, but get my book. It's free. It's a PDF. And if what I said made sense to anybody, that we're seeking the optimal, maximally idyllic. Why are we seeking that? Because it's the optimally, maximally idyllic. There are no other reasons to seek it. This is the best, most uncluttered way, non-environmentally affected way to get at it. Get my book and do it, and your life will be better, and the lives of everyone around you will be better. Oh, and we'll save the planet at the same time.
Okay, well, very good. So thanks so much, Josh. It was great
Pleasure's
talking to
been
you.
mine.
Yeah, and please remember that if you like this kind of content, please subscribe and click on the bell icon so that you actually get all the notifications when I post my very few videos that I do per year. All right, thanks a lot, Josh. Take care.
Thanks, Leah. Bye-bye.
Bye.